Welcome to Ethics Week at Baruch College. I'm Professor David Rosenberg. I teach in the law department in the Zicklin School of Business, and I'm also director of the Robert Zicklin Center for Corporate Integrity, which is the host and organizer of today's event. I think that the subject of today's event is perfect for Baruch College's annual Ethics Week because it's not a strictly business issue. It really addresses the question of how a scarce resource should be distributed when that resource is owned by the public itself. For certain publicly owned assets, the subways, buses, tunnels, and some of the bridges and parking spaces in New York City, we've historically accepted that citizens must pay a fee to enjoy the benefits of those assets. But for others, the sidewalks, the libraries, the parks, the beaches, it's always been understood that these should be free to everyone, no matter how crowded they get. Until recently, most of us would have said that the use of our streets by vehicular traffic should also be free, simply because it's always been that way. Nevertheless, when we view space on our streets as a scarce resource, it makes perfectly good sense to consider restricting access to it. One way to do that is to force users to pay for the privilege. And let's admit at the outset that the streets of New York are a disaster. Their chronically overcrowded condition turns otherwise normal people into lunatics. This is my own personal opinion as an immigrant of 32 years to New York from elsewhere in the United States. Otherwise normal people are turned into lunatics who believe that honking their horns will somehow cause the people in front of them to clear a path as if they were freshly plowed snow. But it doesn't work. No matter how much noise you make, there are simply too many cars on our streets to allow you to move along as if you were on an empty rural highway. Despite the traffic moving at a glacial pace, however, many New Yorkers, as well as our neighbors in the outer boroughs, Westchester, Long Island, and even New Jersey, insist on driving to their Manhattan destinations rather than using public transportation. To most of us who understand basic economics, the only sensible solution to the present overcrowding is to exact a price for the privilege of using the road. For every dollar that it might cost to enter downtown Manhattan, some number of drivers on the margin will choose to get off the road and find another way to get to their destination, or maybe stay home. And that has implications which I think we'll talk about today. Congestion pricing attempts to do this. The current plan will charge drivers of regular private cars $15 each day in which they enter Manhattan below 60th Street. Trucks will be charged much more. Taxis and app vehicles will pay a smaller fee per ride. I don't like to call it ride share, because it isn't ride share. I think app vehicles is a much better term for Uber and the like. The price will go down considerably for all drivers during off-peak hours, and I know Nicole will want to talk about that. This plan has been met with what the New Republic magazine calls the kind of, quote, pseudo-populist mockery and resistance that we encounter anytime we attempt to bring about sensible change in New York City. I have lived here for 32 years and remember such reactions to obvious improvements in our quality of life, like the introduction of the Metro card, bike lanes, city bike, and even paying by credit card in taxis. All of these improvements, which I found to be sensible, were met with wild resistance by fellow New Yorkers. Further, congestion pricing has already been introduced with great success in other cities that are not exactly backwaters, even to a New York-centric person. London, Stockholm, and Singapore. They've all implemented similar programs with varying degrees of success to alleviate traffic, importantly to improve air quality, and to raise huge revenues for public transportation. I am personally fairly confident that New York City's plan will help in all three of these areas as well. But such a massive program must have profound implications, some unanticipated by supporters and planners. Happily, we've gathered three of New York City's most knowledgeable experts on congestion pricing to discuss the prospects of our city's plan, soon to be implemented, its likelihood of success, and the unintended effects it might have on various communities. We are delighted to welcome Nicole Gelinas back to the Zicklin Center. Nicole is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing writer to its publication City Journal. She's written extensively on New York City transportation issues for many years. We also welcome back Charles Komanoff. He's an energy policy analyst, transport economist, and environmental activist in New York City. He worked as a modeler for Governor Andrew Cuomo's Fix NYC panel that set the stage for the congestion pricing legislation that was ultimately adopted. Finally, Arif Ullah is executive director of South Bronx Unite and a social and environmental justice advocate, grassroots urban planner, and community activist. Unfortunately, Arif is not able to join us in person and will be speaking via Zoom, and you'll see him on the big screen. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A, for question and answers at the end of our discussion. The three experts will speak, and then we'll have a little interaction up front, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and we'll have two microphones on either side. Simply get in line behind one of the microphones and ask your, please, brief question of 30, 40 seconds. No long speeches expressing your opinion. Of course, your opinion can be encapsulated in the question, but we really want to hear from the experts and let them respond to your questions. So we'll begin first with Nicole Gelinas.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Professor Rosenberg, and I'm honored to be here with Charles and Arif, and thank you all for coming today. I'm not going to tell you whether you should support congestion pricing or oppose congestion pricing. I think after New York City has discussed this and debated this now for 50 years, I've been discussing and debating it now for 22 years, since former Mayor Michael Bloomberg first proposed it in 2002 and quickly backed away from it for 5 years. So I think we're a little bit beyond that. Instead, I will go through the specific plan that we now have before us, which David just kindly laid out for us, and just bring up a few concerns that are brought up by the details of the plan. We no longer have congestion pricing in theory, which is certainly a good idea. We have congestion pricing coming to be in practice, and this fits in with what I think should be New York's motto. New York does the right thing the wrong way in many, many aspects of urban life. You know, outdoor dining, wonderful idea. Look at how New York actually does outdoor dining. Not so wonderful in practice. Same thing with bike lanes. Bike lanes, wonderful idea. Having the bike lanes being taken over by motorized e-bikes, which are not bicycles, going in all different directions, not such a wonderful idea. So let's go into the details of this congestion pricing plan and how some of these details could end up tripping us up. First of all, comparing our congestion pricing plan to London's now 21-year-old congestion pricing program. London has a congestion pricing program that actually charges, albeit in a somewhat blunt way, during the hours when London is congested. So TfL charges a fee from 7 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. in the afternoon to enter core London, noon to 6 on the weekends. And this makes sense from many perspectives. Now let's look at our plan, and I'll explain a couple of the ways in which it doesn't make sense. We're going to have a 24-hour congestion pricing fee. Yes, the price goes down to $3.75 after 9 p.m. and before 5 a.m. But having a 24-hour fee transforms the plan into not an avoidable fee, where in changing your behavior in switching to mass transit or switching to a different time of day, you can avoid the fee altogether. Rather, it becomes an unavoidable tax. If the point of congestion pricing is to divert you to mass transit, that's not possible at 3 in the morning. The commuter railroads don't run. Taking the subway or the bus in the overnight hours is not practicable for many people for various reasons. So if you're coming home at 1:30, 2 a.m., if you're going to the office or leaving Manhattan to go to the airport at, say, 6 a.m., you want to avoid the fee by coming in earlier, you can't avoid the fee. Even at 4 a.m., you will be paying the fee. This gets rid of a big safety valve for congestion pricing, just for people to be able to change their routines by a couple of hours and avoid the fee altogether. It solves a lot of problems. It solves a big part of the issue of public employees driving their own vehicles to work in Manhattan. That's a big issue of contention right now. And it harms the narrative of we are doing this for congestion. Obviously, there's no congestion at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., so the narrative becomes very different. And you can say, well, why didn't the MTA, which is running this program, solve this problem by just not having a fee in the overnight hours, right? Problem solved, just like London. The reason they're not doing that is because this is mainly driven by a need to raise revenue, not to reduce congestion, and shows a core misalignment in the program that makes it a program that is less likely to succeed from the outset. In London, for example, congestion pricing, even 21 years along, it still only raises the equivalent of $200 million a year for the London transit system. It is not primarily a revenue-raising program. Our program, by contrast, is under pressure from day one to raise at least $1 billion a year, and most likely more, because the point of the program is to fund bonds that the MTA must raise to fund its capital investments. The higher interest rates are, the higher rates it has to pay on those bonds, and so it needs more money from congestion pricing. Not the best way to set up a congestion pricing program. So the second issue is how the MTA and how elected and appointed New York State government officials are treating New Jersey. New Jersey, our neighbor, I know it's easy and fun to make fun of New Jersey, but the rhetoric coming from the governor and the rhetoric coming from the MTA chairman is not useful from the perspective of regional goodwill, and also doesn't make a lot of factual sense. As many of you know, the governor of New Jersey and several other elected New Jersey officials have come out against congestion pricing, saying, in essence, the people who drive through the tunnels and across the George Washington Bridge are already paying a fee to drive from New Jersey to Manhattan. They shouldn't have to pay an extra fee once they get into Manhattan. In response, the governor and the MTA chairman release an avalanche of ad hominem criticism against New Jersey rather than engage on the merits. What are the merits? New Jersey actually has a good point. If you are coming from New Jersey, coming through the Holland or Lincoln tunnels, we'll leave the bridge aside for the moment, you are already paying close to $14 on Easy Pass to come through that tunnel. There's even a congestion pricing charge that the Port Authority has levied on those tunnels for more than a decade now. If you're coming in at peak hours, which are real peak hours, not 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., you pay an extra $2 congestion charge to go through that tunnel. What does that money go toward? Hundreds of millions of dollars a year in surplus from those tunnel tolls goes towards keeping up the mass transit that also comes from New Jersey to Manhattan. So this funds the PATH tubes, the PATH service. It also funds the bus terminal and New Jersey Transit service to the bus terminal. So this is how congestion pricing is supposed to work. If you're driving from New Jersey for whatever reason you have, you are already paying a massive fee which funds the parallel mass transit from New Jersey. And we already have a bi-state entity set up that is supposed to engage both states in figuring out how much do you want to charge drivers and how do you want to allocate that money across mass transit. Instead of engaging on these issues, should some of the congestion money go to New Jersey Transit in subsidizing more parallel mass transit from New Jersey, the state and the MTA prefer to attack New Jersey. Not the best sign that they're coming at this with the best of intentions at the moment. Just a couple other quick issues to bring up, and then I'll look forward to Charles's remarks. The issue of public employees driving their own vehicles to work in Manhattan, firefighters, teachers, police officers, and so forth. Public employees, according to transportation expert Bruce Schaller, did a study about 15 years ago. They already drive at a rate that is twice as high as private sector employees. More than a quarter of public employees drive into Manhattan, much higher than 12% or so who drive to come and work in the private sector in Manhattan. Why do they do that? Partly it's because they work irregular hours, but a big part of it is that they get free, albeit not legal, parking in Manhattan. They can use a parking placard, just sort of park up on the sidewalk in downtown Manhattan, and they won't get a ticket. Enforcing congestion pricing against public employees who will now have a big incentive to cover up their license plate, use a ghost plate, use one of those devices that flips the license plate over when they cross that congestion pricing cordon, is a big open question. This is going to have to be done by human enforcement. Are police officers going to have the will and are going to be supervised in ensuring that they have the will to stop other fellow public employees and give them a ticket effectively for avoiding the congestion pricing fee? This is going to be a big deal, as we've seen over the past 4 years. If you don't enforce the law on a consistent basis, people will break the law on a consistent basis. And the MTA is only just now starting to think about how it's going to avoid this issue. If it doesn't avoid the issue, you pretty much undo the congestion benefits of congestion pricing. The MTA's own environmental impact statement said, if you just get public employees to stop driving to work at the rate that they drive to work, you would actually gain all of the congestion pricing benefits from congestion pricing without actually having to do the pricing. So that's another big issue. One issue, too, related to that is that we've seen in the past 4 years that chaos fills a vacuum. So if the Manhattan streets are indeed less congested from congestion pricing, what are the city and state's plans to make sure that that emptier space is not filled up by speeding vehicles? They'll have much more run of the road to speed. Will we have a plan in place to put up more red light cameras, more speeding cameras to make sure that congestion pricing doesn't actually make the streets of Manhattan more dangerous? No sense of cooperation from the city and state on that front. And the issue of, perhaps the most important issue, the issue of, does congestion pricing help all of New York City and the region, or does it only help core Manhattan? For years and years and years, in talking about congestion pricing, Mayor Bloomberg, Governor Cuomo said, this will help New Yorkers outside of the congestion zone. In the Bronx, it will reduce asthma rates by reducing traffic in the Bronx because fewer vehicles will be driving through the Bronx to get to Manhattan. Same with downtown Brooklyn, same with northern New Jersey, same with Staten Island. Everybody will see at least a very small reduction in traffic. Well, when the congestion pricing environmental documents came out nearly 2 years ago, that turned out not to be the case on paper. The MTA projects in these environmental documents that traffic in the Bronx will actually go up, traffic in northern New Jersey will go up, traffic in Staten Island will go up. Why is that? Because vehicles will be We'll have an incentive to avoid the congestion zone, effectively go around it when it comes to the Bronx. So rather than go across Canal Street and Houston Street, some trucks will go across the Cross Bronx Expressway on their way from New Jersey to the east and vice versa. That means, as the MTA puts it, we'll see 50 to 700 more trucks each day on the Cross Bronx Expressway. From being told for years that this will reduce traffic in the Bronx and having it say on paper, no, it won't, and then having the MTA, state officials kind of try to wave away that little inconvenience with some rather superficial mitigation impacts, again, doesn't give you much confidence that they're thinking about this from the perspective of congestion and quality of life. They are thinking about it more from the perspective of how do we raise $1 billion a year for the MTA. I'll just end with perhaps the biggest issue of concern at the moment. Congestion pricing, as Professor Rosenberg said, was enacted into law in 2019. 2019 was a long time ago. It's 5 years ago. New York City is a very different city today from where it was in 2019. If you're thinking about how do we get people back into the congestion zone, Manhattan below 60th Street, we don't have the same problems that we had 5 years ago. Office workers still only going to work 3 days a week. Broadway patronage still down 17%. Most of those lost patrons are from the broader New York region. New York is still struggling with how do you get people to come to Manhattan in the same numbers that they were coming 5 years ago. No, you don't want people driving in. But the reality is, if you look at transit ridership versus the driving statistics, the mass transit ridership is still less than 3/4 of where it was in 2019, but people driving into Manhattan is a little bit over 100% of where it was in 2019, 103, 105%. So some number of people have switched from taking transit to driving. The risk of doing congestion pricing now is that you send those people away from Manhattan altogether. Maybe that's a risk that we should be taking. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But there is no question that in a very fragile recovery for Manhattan, which is in turn driving a fragile recovery for the region, New York, for example, is 3 years behind the country as a whole in recovering its private sector jobs from COVID and from the COVID aftermath. You want to make sure that you are doing this in the most competent way possible, doing this with the best regional goodwill possible, and making sure that we're spending the money in the wisest way possible. Another issue the MTA still hasn't figured out to be as efficient in building and running transit relative to the rest of the global transit world. Much more expensive to run transit here rather than London, Tokyo, Berlin, Paris, and so forth. So doing this at this moment, you want to do it the best way you can do it. Not at all clear that New York is going about this and making sure that the program is the best that it can be. And with that, I'll look forward to Charles's comments.
I've been following Nicole Gelinas' writings for 15 years or more, and I particularly remember around 2010 when the great Bloomberg Transportation Commissioner Jeanette Sadiq-Khan was being savaged by the tabloids, including by the New York Post, for whom Nicole was and continues to write. Nicole, took Jeanette's side and praised her as a practical visionary who was reshaping the city's streets for the benefits of all. It was a brave thing for you to do, and it was typical of you. And after following you for so long as a reader, I'm happy to follow you on the podium. Congestion pricing is a really big deal. It's a big deal because it is intended to and will raise at least $1 billion a year in new net revenue after subtracting the administrative cost of the toll system in order to, as Nicole said, bond $15 billion worth of capital investment, and we should talk about what that $15 billion is going to bring. And anybody who talks about a public program that is going to take $1 billion or more a year from a certain class of people, or you could say an activity because it's only from certain drivers and certain drivers driving part of the time, into the core of Manhattan. But if you don't have a certain amount of humility about that, about taxing $1 billion of money from a class and putting it somewhere else, then you shouldn't be in public policy. And I mean, sorry, who is that a dig against? Maybe I'm just trying to inoculate myself. Because I am a strong believer, you could even say I'm a true believer, in congestion pricing for New York City. And actually, Nicole, after those nice things I said, could you do me the favor and bring that piece of paper that I left there, because I've got a few notes. There is no place on earth that is better suited for congestion pricing than our city of New York. Now, that, of course, doesn't guarantee that it's a good idea, because, it could be bad for everybody and we're just the least bad. But no, I don't believe that. There are three principal factors that make congestion pricing terrific for New York and vice versa. One is that we have endemic, chronic, catastrophic, crippling, dispiriting, and economy-destroying, as well as soul-destroying traffic congestion in New York City pretty much 18 hours a day. I certainly agree with Nicole about the overnight hours. In fact, I agree with Nicole on a great many of her points, but I still think that congestion pricing should stand and should be implemented. And congestion pricing, by eliminating maybe about 15%, that's kind of the sweet spot. You want about 85% of those trips to continue, but you want about 15% to disappear, because if you can get about 15% of the trips priced off the road, tolled off the road, the reductions in dysfunctional traffic congestion, time wasted more than anything else, will be enormous. So that's benefit or attribute one. The second is that we do have an efficient, I want to say terrific, I'm not going to say terrific about our mass transit and subway system now, because things are far too chaotic, disorderly, and dangerous right now in the subways, and that absolutely has got to change. But in other times, and I look forward to its being that way again, because we're not going to survive as a city, with or without congestion pricing, if we have a subway system that people don't feel safe about using. That is the means, the subways, by which a majority of people, and I've got a chart for that, maybe I'll get to show it, not yet, sorry, by which the majority of people from everywhere who come into the central business district, that's how they get there. The subway system does not necessarily serve, for radial or, getting from outskirt 1 to outskirt 7, but it's great for getting people into the core, so that's the second. The third and final attribute, and this is a little bit of a subtle point, is that being and getting into the core of Manhattan is so valuable, is so important to the people who do it or who drive there now, that most of them will continue to do it in the face of the toll, which is what we want, because we want to extract that revenue from their driving. We are turning the car from a sacred cow to a cash cow, and we need it. And notwithstanding, and again here too, I agree with Nicole about MTA inefficiency. The MTA needs to be able to finance its next or current or whatever it is capital plan in order to be able to pay for elevators, new rolling stock, and above all, communications-based train control, digital control of trains that will enable all 26 subway lines in the city, not just the 7 and the L that already have CBTC, to be able to run not just 20 trains per hour, but 24, 26, 28. It would be great if everybody could just like silence their phones, unless that's my phone. Thank you. Let's look at the benefits. And Rocky, I may need some help from you here. Here we go. Now, is this? Maybe I'll explain, while we're setting this up. What makes me an expert about congestion pricing? Well, what makes Nicole an expert is that she's a public policy genius and a brilliant writer, and she's been following and writing about public policy for a quarter of a century, and in my book, that qualifies her. What qualifies me is that beginning 17 years ago, under the aegis of the late, great labor mediator and civic titan Theodore Kiel, I began creating an Excel spreadsheet model that models congestion pricing. And if we get a chance, we might want to play around with that in the Q&A. Nicole, we could see what would happen if we zeroed out the overnight toll instead of charging $3.75, which, by the way, is only about a third more than the $2.90 that people pay in the middle of the night to ride a subway. So maybe that's not exactly the biggest complaint that we should have about congestion pricing. Are we going to be able to get this to work? So this Excel spreadsheet model has 160,000 equations. And back in 2017 and 2018, as David hinted in his introduction of me, when the previous governor and his staff had to scope out congestion pricing. And by the way, I don't think it's such a terrible thing if congestion pricing is a revenue raiser. The mass transit needs capital investment. It needs revenue. And sure, we could tax the wealthy. Nothing would give me greater pleasure. I mean, I would just go after billionaires like by the jugular. But even if we were able to tax billionaires more than we do now, that money is needed for schools, mental health, parks, sanitation, libraries, every other need. The great thing about congestion pricing is that it uses transportation to fund transportation and make transportation work better. So let's see, we're up there in those places, but that's not something that anybody's going to be able to read. I guess what I want to be able to show in this chart is that congestion pricing, even done suboptimally, even done imperfectly, and the last time I checked, we live in an imperfect world, is going to bring great benefits to New York City. The reason that we are doing congestion pricing is not to divert people to mass transit. And in a funny way, it's not even to raise revenue, or you could say to reduce congestion. It's to make this city a better, safer, more equitable, more accessible, more navigable, and more conducive to living and working and creating place than it is now. And the chart that I'm trying to get up here is one that asserts that even that under more or less the current plan, that the net benefit of congestion pricing in terms of the environmental improvements, the more walking and cycling that we'll have, because with fewer cars, the streets will be more conducive to that. But above all, the time savings for bus riders who won't be stuck as much in car traffic, the time savings for car drivers who will have fewer other cars and drivers to compete with, and over time, the time savings for subway riders, because the capital investment of that $15 billion, whether it's elevators or improved digital communication of train control will mean faster, less waiting time on the platform, less difficulty getting to the platform, less time stuck in trains between stations. Now, again, that will take some time to materialize, but those benefits, so if we could boil it down to any one thing, congestion pricing is a time-saving venture, a time-saving program. I guess this isn't going to happen, huh? Okay, well, you know what? Let's not worry about it. But one of the points I was going to make was that according to my modeling, there will be greater time savings for drivers outside of the congestion zone because of fewer cars trying to squeeze through communities, including the South Bronx, to get from Scarsdale or Riverdale or Albany or the North Pole or wherever to get into the central business district. The percentage time savings will be greatest within the zone, but the total number of hours saved and the value of those time savings will be greater in northern Manhattan, the 4 other boroughs, and the region combined than within the central business district. So congestion pricing is not simply a program to make life better for people who live within the district. It's going to make life better and commutes faster and more reliable and more humane all throughout the region.
It went on for a moment.
Oh, okay. Does that mean congestion pricing's on? Did they switch on the tolls? You know, that expression about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Congestion pricing is such a resilient policy. You know, when I said that you want 15% of the trips to disappear and the other 85% to remain, if it turned out to be 1090 or 2080 rather than 1585, if you follow me, it's okay. There will be great benefits regardless. And the fact that congestion pricing is not being done in the most optimal and perfect way is not a reason to disqualify it. And I will go further and say that those points, we are past the point where we should be cavilling and kvetching over the imperfections of congestion pricing. If we want congestion pricing to happen, even imperfectly, if you stand with me and believe, unfortunately, I can't show you my lovely charts, that it will produce $2 billion a year worth of benefits to New Yorkers. And by the way, I count in my $2 billion net benefits, I count the lost value of the trips that are being priced off the road, right? If Sal from Sheepshead Bay doesn't drive in every day or doesn't even drive in at all anymore, that may be good for everybody else because there's a little bit more space on the road. It's bad for Sal. And we ought to be counting that. Nobody at the MTA that I could see in the 46-volume environmental assessment, which, by the way, had all kinds of flaws, and I think that it really understates the MTA's environmental assessment, the number of trips that will disappear. But whether you think a lot of trips will disappear or not many, we should be counting that as a cost to the people who will no longer be driving in. I do that in my modeling. And if there are any graduate students here who, you know, during the remainder of this program want to sort of figure out, how did I do that? Because it turned out I didn't need to do like differential calculus or integrating the area under the curve. It turned out to be a wonderfully simple thing that I think I could teach to a 6th grader. But I count that in my modeling because I want to count all the costs and benefits. All right, the last thing I'll say at this point, when I say that it is a big deal, there is this concept of economic or environmental externalities. You know, the classic example, you have a factory and it creates value, it creates products, creates jobs, but it also creates pollution, which wafts, in the neighborhood or maybe to distant places and damages vegetation and lungs and visibility and everything else. And that is an externality. And if we don't internalize that pollution cost into the price of the product, then our economic system doesn't really work all that well, because prices, which we depend upon as the medium of information exchange in our market economy, if they don't tell the truth about environmental costs, then things get thrown off. Now, I happen to believe, and I do run a sort of small, struggling not-for-profit called the Carbon Tax Center, that we're never going to solve the climate problem. We're never going to get close to reducing carbon to the extent that we need to, and getting rid of fossil fuels, getting off them quickly in time, unless we internalize the climate damage and as well as health damage from burning fossil fuels into the prices that we pay for using fossil fuels. And one of the reasons, but this is particular to me, I'd love it if some of you sort of signal that maybe you're with me on this as well. I see congestion pricing as a stepping stone to carbon pricing, as proof of the efficacy, the fairness, and the idea that Americans can actually, instead of subsidizing all the clean stuff, to move off of cigarettes, we didn't subsidize chewing gum as an alternative. We went straight for it and taxed cigarettes, and that, as well as other regulatory policies, had a lot to do with getting off of tobacco and cigarettes. So congestion pricing is a big deal, and if we complain too much about it because it's imperfect, we run the risk of tainting the cultural and political environment in which a week or a month or 2 months from now, a federal judge is going to have to rule on all of the litigation against congestion pricing and either hear it, which is going to delay the process for another 6 months or 6 years and probably doom it altogether, or hopefully throw it out. And I hope that the judge will do that, because congestion pricing is going to be a great thing for our city.
Thanks, Charles. And thank you to everyone for your patience with our technical difficulties. Okay, we'll now be joined via Zoom by Arif Ullah of South Bronx Unite, who will talk about the specific effects that congestion pricing might have on a specific New York City community.
Thank you, Professor, and it's a real honor to be on a panel with Nicole and Charles. Really appreciate it, hearing your perspectives. And I'm going to just share my screen for a moment. Can you all see this image of our waterfront right now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. So before I get into this image, one of the things that I just want to communicate very clearly to everyone is that principally South Bronx Unite is supportive of a scheme like congestion pricing. And we are also supportive of funds to improve mass transit. Communities like ours are often ones that mass transit doesn't always serve fully. So we are in principle supportive of it. However, we have to approach this with an environmental justice lens, and I'll get into that in just a moment. I also want to just very clearly state that this is not about NIMBYism for us, not in my own backyard, and you'll see how much burden we're already shouldering, and so this is nothing of that sort. What you're looking at here on the screen is just one image of our waterfront. And This is just one example of the types of polluting facilities that already exists in the South Bronx. Now I'm going to focus specifically on the Mott Haven, Port Morris sections of the South Bronx. This site right here is one of two peaker plant sites. Peaker plants, or peak power plants, as some of you might know it as, are understood to be activated only on peak energy demand days. For example, the hottest days in the summer. They're running on a much more regular basis now, and that's just a fact. And then let's see. This is another facility, also on our waterfront. Home heating oil is what is being stored here and then being distributed to different parts of the city. And then here is a image of some of the roadways that slice through and strangle. And I use those words very, very intentionally, that slice through and strangle our community. And you can see the proximity to densely populated housing. The tall brown buildings you might recognize as being public housing, and they are, and then many other types of buildings. So we are disproportionately pollution burdened. We have been disproportionately pollution burdened for many decades. When we talk about racist policies like redlining, we are still reeling from the legacy of policies.
Arif, just give us one moment, please. Okay, and you're back.
All right, great. So the point that I'm making is that there has been an enormous burden placed on a community like ours. We are often the sacrifice zone, a term that you may have heard, like other frontline communities. And sadly, frontline communities, at least in this part of the country, often end up being Black, brown, immigrant, and low income. And we are shouldering the burden for the public good, right? So these power plants that I showed you a little while ago, that is providing a invaluable public service. We need to power our homes. Then there's a waste management facility on our waterfront that is also providing an invaluable service. It processes the household waste of the entire Bronx. There's a medical waste facility that's providing a public good. There's the home heating oil facility. There's a fresh direct facility that sees 1,000 daily truck trips through our community, all diesel engine. That is, presumably providing a good. Maybe not a public good, but it is providing a good, primarily to people who do not live in our neighborhood. The FedEx station is also providing that public good. The point here is that why is it that a community like the South Bronx has been forced to shoulder that burden of the greater public good over and over and over again? And so, again, as much as we are supportive of the concept of congestion pricing, even adding a few more trucks to our roadways is harmful to our community. And so the disproportionate pollution burden that I just described to you, that you've been seeing in these images, that has a real consequence on our health. We hear about asthma when we talk about congestion, when we talk about air pollution. But there's been a lot of research done actually that show very clearly that exposure to air pollution is also correlated, if not causes, illnesses like asthma, of course, but also diabetes, obesity, heart disease, dementia, and even causes infant mortality and poor maternal health. This is just a fact. And our communities, our lives, our quality of life is diminished as a result of that. So let's just take the example of asthma. A child who has asthma as a result of this immense pollution burden. That child will likely miss many more days of school than a child who does not have asthma. That missing of school days could very well determine how that child does in school or even whether that child graduates from school. And whether that child graduates from school and their school performance will determine what kind of job they're able to get. What kind of job they're able to get will determine their income, which will then determine the kind of life they're able to give to their family and their own children. This is generational. We're not talking about a moment in time. We're talking about generations that are impacted by this type of exposure to air pollution. And so adding more daily trips, including truck trips to our roads, has a real impact on our quality of life, and in fact, determines in future generations to come and what kinds of lives they're also able to lead. And so Nicole and I think Charles also mentioned, and I'll just stop sharing right now, but Nicole and Charles have also mentioned the environmental impact analysis, or what's called as the CBD tolling program environmental assessment. And they did analyze air quality pollutants, including carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulate matter, what we call PM 2.5 and PM10, sulfur dioxide, lead, all of that. And they found through this environmental assessment that the program would increase, again, it would increase all pollutants in Bronx County. While there are certain boroughs, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, which would experience decrease. Now, I'm not trying to pit ourselves against any of our, any of the other boroughs. We have a lot of solidarity with frontline communities across the city, but making the point yet again that we are shouldering the burden. The environmental assessment also found that the program would result in traffic diversions into the Bronx, and I'm quoting here, traffic diversions into the Bronx, and that, quote, these diversions would be most pronounced across the South Bronx, close quote. This is just the reality of it. And this is across all of the scenarios that were proposed by the MTA. The Cross Bronx could experience a daily increase of up to 700 additional trucks. And I think Nicole may have said that already. And the Triborough, or what we now know as the Robert Kennedy Bridge, would experience upwards of 4,000 additional trucks every day. This is a significant number. Even a marginal number would contribute to poorer air quality. And the impact of these types of traffic diversions in, across, and through communities in the South Bronx also results in what's known as the city's, well, let me rephrase that, also results in the city's highest impact level of what's known as vehicle miles traveled. And these scenarios, at least 3 of the scenarios highlighted in the environmental justice section of the report, shows that more than 8,000 vehicle miles traveled would be in our section of the South Bronx, Mott Haven, Port Morris, specifically along the major Deegan Expressway, which cuts through our community throughout the Harlem River Yards, and of course across the Robert Kennedy Bridge. So this is what we're looking at. This is the environmental burden that we already have, and the additional environmental burden that would be placed on us by a program like congestion pricing. We simply can't afford to shoulder any more burden for the greater public good. We've done that across many decades. And one of the things that maybe I'll end with this is, we have been in conversation with the MTA around mitigation measures, and I expect that Charles will bring that up, and rightfully so. And yes, there are mitigation measures that have been offered and will be implemented if congestion pricing does go through it. And yes, those mitigation measures would alleviate some of the pollution, including more funding for green space, and including more funding for what's known as Clean Trucks Voucher Program. I mean, our position is that it wouldn't, first of all, address the extent to which the trucks that have been, or the vehicles that are being diverted, it wouldn't address the entire additional burden, number one. And number two, why is it that these types of measures are, and mitigation measures are only being proposed now? This is a community that has been enduring many, many decades of environmental pollution. And it's unfortunate that it's only at this moment where there is this sort of bargaining chip right now. You all shoulder again the burden, and here's what we can give you. We want to be able to breathe clean air, just like people in other parts of the city. I understand that the air quality is poor south of 60th Street. I can assure you that it's not nearly as poor as what we have in the South Bronx. And we want to be able to support public policies that also value our lives. And I'll end there.
Thanks. Arif, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Do you want to try to stick around and you can answer questions as well?
Sure.
And interact with the rest of the panel. Again, thanks so much for your willingness to do it this way. I'd be interested to hear Nicole and Charles's response. First, if they think your assessment, his assessment is accurate about his specific community and other communities, what might be a solution to this problem? Because it does seem to me that when you, divert traffic from one place, it will end up in another place. And I remember hearing that neighborhoods in outer London were also worried about this problem, and I don't know how that ended up either. So I'd be interested to hear, to begin with, Nicole and Charles's responses to Arif's assessment.
Well, maybe Charles should go first because I know you dispute the environmental assessment findings.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that South Bronx Unite and Congressmember Richie Torres were able to leverage the specter of worsened environmental outcomes in the South Bronx and the Bronx as a whole in order to get $155 million, if that's the number of pledges for the measures that are referred to. And in fact, a down payment on that came yesterday, didn't it, when Mayor Adams announced, along with $60 million for electric school buses, $15 million to electrify the Hunts Point Food Market Diesel Truck Depot, which will not overnight convert every combustion truck to electric, but will be a big start, and that was part of the deal as well. And so that's great. And I know the South Bronx fairly well as an outsider. I don't live there. I don't know it the way that Arif and South Bronx Unite stalwarts do. But I've been on 3 of your environmental tours of the South Bronx. I've biked up Willow Avenue past the oil storage tanks, and I have to go back in my mind 50 years in Manhattan to ever having a whiff and a blast of what were obviously, particulates and NOx and hydrocarbons the way that I had that day just a few years ago with my pal Doug Goodman, who's taking my picture over there. Remember that day, Doug? That was, that was something. So, good for you guys for leveraging that. However, I am of the opinion that the MTA completely bungled its environmental analysis with respect to this diversion thing, and that all of the VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and all of the pollution burdens and all of the extra truck trips, it's one thing being, and its many facets being described by Arif. What they bungled is that they totally underplayed the MTA in its environmental assessment, the extent to which car trips into Manhattan would diminish. It has actually very few of them diminishing. And the import of that is sort of twofold. One is that I think, there will be a big diminution of car trips and maybe to a little bit of an extent truck trips coming down through the South Bronx on the Deegan, the RFK Bridge, and across on the Cross Bronx Expressway due to this diminution. And that will help offset any diversion that there might be. But the other is that where is this diversion going to happen? I think, if I understand it correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, Arif, it's mostly, in theory, trucks coming west to east from like Secaucus, New Jersey, or the big truck depots in New Jersey that now go through the Lincoln Tunnel and cross Manhattan and go into Queens, so to deliver stuff. And the theory is that the toll to drive into Manhattan will be increased and that will encourage trips to divert to the north or to the south through Staten Island. What's missing from that analysis, and I've done that analysis, is the improvement in travel speeds to go through Manhattan that any rational trucker or most rational truckers will see. It's to our benefit to even pay an increased toll because we will save more in time crossing than in that will more than offset the toll that we'll have to pay. And who knows, it may even be that some trips that now divert because they don't want to get stuck in that Midtown traffic or traffic at the Lincoln or going out through the Queens Midtown Tunnel or the Queensboro Bridge, will see that it is in their interest to go through Manhattan. The MTA missed that. So I tip my hat to you guys for leveraging that specter to get stuff that you should have been getting for decades. I completely agree with you. And I express my gratitude to South Bronx Unite and the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance as a whole for staying with congestion pricing more or less when you could have trashed it, which would have ended the whole thing. I think you did a fabulous thing for the city as a whole. I am so grateful. But I think that the MTA set us all up by bungling that piece of the analysis.
Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question would be, why did the MTA bungle it? I'm not saying they didn't or they did. I don't have the particular expertise to look at that and say, oh, that's wrong. Whereas in a lot of areas, whether it's the city budget or, to pick another three things, I could look at it and say, oh, that's wrong. So I have a lot of empathy for you, and I guess this is one of the issues where if we do go ahead and push the button on it in a few months, time will tell whether you are correct or incorrect. But it was yet another miscalculation on the MTA's part. If indeed this is wrong and they hired professional traffic experts, they paid them a lot of money, you would think that the MTA would have said on the weeks and days before they released this in August 2022, this analysis says we could have up to 700 more trucks on the Cross Bronx. That's going to be a problem. Why don't we take a second look at this? Why don't we at least call Congressman Tories and give him a heads up, which
or
they
call me,
which they did not. And so it doesn't give you a lot of confidence that they're going about this the right way, which gets us back to one of our sort of original issues. I think another issue is the lack of flexibility in the MTA bureaucracy and in the program. So let's say, for the sake of argument, Charles is right, the number of cars goes down significantly in the Cross Bronx. That means the trucks go across the Cross Bronx much more quickly. That means they're spending less time idling in the South Bronx. That's good, but what if Charles is wrong? Then the MTA needs to scramble very quickly to reorganize the program, reorganize the fee structure, think about what it wants to do with trucks to get them going back across Manhattan instead of going back across the Cross Bronx. Do we have confidence that the MTA has the flexibility to go back and redo the fee structure quickly and not take another 5 years to do that? That's another big issue, and I think it points to the broader issue of we are trying to overlay a sound, pristine economic and urban theory onto a state and local government that is very broken in many ways and that is not responsive to people from all different backgrounds with all different needs and wishes. And how long can we continue to do that before we have to think about we've got to fix these things that are broken?
I have to say, I have some sympathy with Charles's sort of broad statement that this is imperfect, but it's really, really good nonetheless. And I'd like to hear your responses to sort of the typical complaint that I've heard, particularly from the governor of New Jersey, who I otherwise agree on just about everything with him. And I wish he would, well, I won't. I was going to say I wish he would run for president. But I do agree with him on a lot of things. But he is so adamant about how this is going to hurt the little guy in New Jersey and that they're just subsidizing New York. But it seems to me that, and the way he talks about it, and I've heard him on the radio a lot, talk about like a plumber in New Jersey who works in Manhattan. And it's just, he's going to get charged $15 a day. He's someone who can't take public transportation. He needs to take his van to do his job. But it seems to me that the way this is designed, he's going to pay an extra $15 a day. But if the traffic is, if he gets into Manhattan 10 minutes faster and gets home 10 minutes faster,
Actually,
it's only
David,
costing
that's just-
$45 an hour.
That's just the tip of the benefit, because the real benefit, a plumber or any tradesperson isn't just doing one job in the zone on a given day. They're doing 2 or 4 or 7, and so they're having to do more driving in the zone than most people. And if they can save not just 10 minutes in and 10 minutes out, but 10 minutes from job A to job B and 10 minutes from job D to job, they will very quickly recoup the actually $30 that they might pay if the van is big enough. So the plumber is the wrong, would be Murphy's wrong example. But I sympathize with the general idea, and what I proposed, for whatever it's worth, when I wrote a paper last July laying out what I thought would be an enlightened and fair as well as effective toll structure, I proposed completely crediting in the congestion toll the upstream toll paid by people, and by the way, they don't have to be New Jersey residents, they can be residents of, California or New Zealand, or even New Yorkers coming back who have driven through the Lincoln or the Holland Tunnel. I wanted that full Lincoln or Holland Tunnel toll credited against their congestion toll, which would have had the practical effect of sort of zeroing out the congestion toll for those trips. I didn't want that for the George, because when you drive over the George Washington Bridge and you hit Manhattan at 178th Street, then you've got 6 miles if you're going into the zone, and that's the people that we're concerned about in this hypothetical. And that 6 miles and 30 minutes or whatever it is, you are subjecting people to environmental externalities, including congestion. So I thought that was a good way, a Solomon-like decision, I was surprised that the final recommendation didn't go that way. It has a small toll credit, not a full one. And part of why I was surprised is that in almost every respect, the recommendation, which is what the MTA board in full adopted at the beginning of December, adhered almost like to the letter, to the dollar of what I had recommended last summer. So they did sort of finally listen to some extent. I wish that they had done that on the other. But the other thing that I just want to say, to amplify Nicole's point, I think that the MTA quickly figured out, after they released their 4,000-page, 46-volume statement assessment 2 summers ago, that they had screwed up on some stuff. But you know what? At that point, they couldn't backtrack. They couldn't redo it, because that would have been another 3 months or 6 months or a year. And more important, the opponents would have been screaming that, oh, the MTA, they only changed, they cooked their books, they changed their numbers because things didn't work out. Screw them, we don't trust them. In other words, the whole process, you're right, what's broken, I think, to use that adjective, isn't so much government, it is the process of making big change in the world. And another little example of that, and then I promise I'll stop. Is it Supreme Court Judge Arthur Engoron, the one that, like, I say a thank you prayer to him every night for going against, like, the former guy with the judgment. Which lawsuit was it? The Stormy Daniels or the falsifying? I can't even keep track of it. You know what I'm talking about. Well, 6 months before he did that mitzvah for our country, I think the same judge blocked construction of a badly needed housing project, because I think all housing in the city is badly needed, that would have been on a parking lot like past the South Street Seaport, the perfect place to be building housing in our city and in the world, and he blocked it on some stupid, in my opinion, procedural ground. It's just so hard to make change, and that's why I want the people who say congestion pricing, yeah, good idea, maybe, but it's not perfect, and maybe we should take another look. Don't take another look. We've had enough looks. If you want it and are willing to give it a try, then get behind it.
Thanks for that. In the meantime, let's line up for Q&A, if you like, behind either microphone. And I'll just ask one question while you're going up there for any of our experts. What are some of the lessons that we can learn from the other cities that did congestion pricing, that maybe adjusted the program? I do think London is in many ways comparable to New York in terms of its transport needs, both on the road and public transport. It seems to have gone reasonably well there. What lessons can we learn from them?
I think the main lesson from London is two things. One, don't have a 24-hour fee. In fact, London was going to expand their fee into the evening hours and rolled that back right after the COVID recovery began, because they were worried charging people 9, 10 o'clock at night is going to hurt the nightlife. Whether that's the case or not, who knows? But they clearly thought this was an impediment to getting people back into core Manhattan in the nighttime hours. I think the even bigger lesson is you have to have much better transit for this to work and maintain the goodwill of people. So they vastly expanded their bus service. They have much more frequent commuter rail service than we do, although actually there's been a lot of reliability and cost issues with commuter rail service over the past couple of years. But you can't have it where you're telling people, go use mass transit. It's really easy. Do this on the weekend. You can do it yourself. It's easy. Make Google Maps from places and just see. Is it easier and faster to drive from here to here, or is it easier and faster to take mass transit? And a lot of these trips, including trips from within New York City into the congestion zone, it is faster to drive because of various inefficiencies in our transit system. Those things need to be addressed. Including the bus lanes. Fifth Avenue bus lane actually works pretty well right now, but I think we need more bus lanes and better enforced bus lanes.
So the mayor of London, who introduced congestion pricing in 2003, Ken Livingstone, a.k.a. Red Ken, because he was like really on the left, would sometimes refer to his city as North Korea with elections every 5 years. And what he meant is that he, as mayor, had the power to do anything that he wanted to. So if he wanted to put more bus lanes on the street, he did it. Whereas here, if the MTA wants or wanted to put more bus lanes on the street, what do they have to deal with? They have to deal with a mayor of the city of New York who was brilliantly taken down in a fabulous essay in the New York Times a week ago by my colleague here. They have to get our mayor to stand up to his car-addled associates and his own car brain and put through bus lanes in New York City, which of course our mayor has been unwilling to do. In other words, London's transportation system is under the authority of one person. Here it's just all splintered.
Fair enough. All right, let's go to the questions over here. Brief questions, please, and address them to a specific panelist or to anyone, or to all of them.
Yes, thank you very much for everything, because for me it was just money, okay, for MTA, but I learned much more, so thank you for the panel. I don't have a car, so in a way I said I don't care, but I care now. The problem, as Nicole said, is the security in MTA. I have been here for 30 years. I was working in a restaurant. I was taking South Bronx, the number 2, okay? South Bronx, Harlem. I mean, it was dangerous. I knew how to drive, okay? I never was worried at all. Right now, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm freaking out that somebody will push me. So I told my daughter, 17, always put you behind, tall things, get out. And then they spend how many million to this freaking gate? Even my daughter was laughing like hell because she said, what the heck is that? So how we can, I understand all this, but how we can stop this MTA spending this money for nothings?
I think Nicole has spent some time thinking about this subject.
Yeah, thank you for your question, and I'm glad that you brought up the crime issue, and to give Charles credit, Charles actually brought up the crime issue on the transit system. This is an issue where the statistics and people's day-to-day feelings are pointing in the same direction. The trains are much less safe and much less orderly than they were 4 years ago. So from 1997 to 2019, we had an average of fewer than 2 homicides on the subway system every year. The system with the ridership close to 2 billion, that's probably as low as you're ever going to get it. Since early 2020, when during the first month of lockdown, we had 3 homicides in the course of 5 weeks. That was including the subway motorman who was killed in an arson attack in March of 2020. Garrett Goebel left behind a wife and child, 2 children actually. One was a small baby at the time. That was a sign that things were not going in the right direction, and our elected officials have not grappled with this. I mean, we've had 34 homicides since March of 2020 on the subway system. That is 15 years worth of homicides crammed into 4 years. 2 of them have already been adjudicated as self-defense. That does not include the Jordan Neely, Daniel Penny case. There were 2 other cases where grand juries decided this was self-defense, but there's still 2 people dead because the city failed to control the disorder before it escalated to homicide. Assaults are up both in raw numbers and per capita on the subway when you account for the lower ridership, but that's not the only issue. The chance of being the victim of violent crime on the subway are twice as high as they were in 2019. Now, some of our good people will say, you're still not very likely to be killed or assaulted on the subway. That's absolutely true. Of course, you're not likely to be killed or assaulted doing anything. The definition of news is that it is unusual, but it is more likely than it was. We know how to prevent this disorder, and we're not doing it, and that makes people uncomfortable on the trains, and we've got to get that under control so it doesn't seem like congestion pricing is forcing people on the trains when they do not feel safe being on the trains. And by the way, the political liability may not be as important, but the minute someone is injured and they say, I only took the train because of the congestion fee, that is also a political issue for the governor, which explains why she's putting the military on the trains.
Can revenue from the congestion pricing program be used to improve safety on the subways? It seems like that would be a good place to start. Let's go over here to the...
Yes.
This side.
Thank you. Like the gentleman from the Bronx, I happen to be a resident of the Lower East Side, an environmental justice community, a NORC community, meaning we have a high propensity of elderly people. We are, in the environmental assessment, one of the communities which is going to suffer. We get an increase in our PM 2.5s, we get an increase in traffic, we get no advantage. I am 7/10 of a mile from a subway station. I am 1 mile from a subway station. We have no accessible subway stations on the Lower East Side. We here to talk about ethics. What's the ethics of hurting an environmental justice community with a bad policy when we could have a good policy? I'm for congestion pricing. I'm not for this plan, which hurts people of color, low income, the disabled, and people who cannot pay the prices in the community. In the zone, all our prices, our food, our drugs, everything we buy is going to go up. And the MTA says no, because it's going to be split among many trips. Each of the contractors we talk to make one trip into the zone. The plumber is going to pay, everybody in the zone is going to pay more. And unlike London, by the way, everybody likes to compare with London. People in the zone in London get a 90% discount. Why is it that this plan is designed to hurt the poorest people and advantage those others?
Well, you're complaining about a lot of things, and I'm not sure that your complaints are all that consistent. Let's start with London. 5 times as many New Yorkers live in our zone as Londoners live in their zone. So the exemption, which is what a 90% discount, excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you. It's a little bit, I'm sure it's more than 5 to 1 because the propensity to own cars is more where you are, and a lot of you guys get subsidized parking. If you live in NYCHA or ILGWU housing, you pay like $100 or $150 a month for parking when market rate would be much higher, but I'll let that one go. To exempt residents of the zone, and I'm a resident of the zone as well, to exempt us from the congestion charge would be to destroy the whole thing. Because the good people just like you and me from Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Northern Manhattan, not to mention the suburbs, would look at us and say, hey, you guys are going to get the biggest reduction in traffic. You're going to get the biggest improvement in air quality, and I'll come back to that in a second. And you're complaining about paying a charge? Well, then, if you're exempted, I should be exempted. The whole thing would fall apart. Now, maybe you want it to fall apart. I don't want it to fall apart. So I have been opposing exemptions, as you know, within the zone. The thing about air quality, and I have to say this in all honesty, and here I'm going to ask for some help from you. How is it, and I haven't read this part of the environmental assessment, I confess, tell me if we can do this, the mechanism by, the sort of traffic mechanism or theory by which the Lower East Side is going to end up with more traffic with congestion pricing than it has now.
You want to know why?
And go to the mic so we can, if this is okay?
Okay. Couple more minutes on this question, and then we'll get to more.
Traffic that is coming into Manhattan to avoid the zone is being directed to the FDR Drive.
Stop
You're
there.
interrupting me now.
Okay, because I don't understand it.
You're interrupting me.
I don't understand it, and I want to understand
Okay.
it. Please, give me a person from, is it Scarsdale or Mott Haven or where? What is the
Anybody
trip that is
coming
going
down
to...
the FDR Drive from New Jersey, the Westchester, anywhere north, to avoid the zone is being directed to the free zone to go to Brooklyn on the FDR Drive.
And what are those people doing now? Because it's not as if they're going to wake up and say, there's a free thing on the FDR, I'm going to drive on it. Right now, if they're going to whatever destination, either they're on the FDR or they're on Avenue D, C, B, or A and creating pollution on your local streets where people actually live, whereas they don't live on the FDR. That's what I don't get.
Neither do we. That's why why does the environmental assessment say that traffic on the FDR Drive will increase, and there is no mitigation for it?
And
you explain it to me.
Yes, because if it will increase, or it might increase.
No, it will increase.
Only because it will diminish on the entire Lower East Side, which is in the zone, that people, sorry, I'm yelling, people will drive.
Yes. So you're telling
people will
you're
divert
telling the
from
100,000 people, NYCHA residents who live along the FDR Drive, that they now have to take the bad air that other people are creating, and I have to breathe it in my apartment.
Would it be better for those cars to still be on Avenue B?
Okay, I think
it's
you've
not.
both
It's not.
made the
an
point, and I
that's
think
the
this
problem with
illustrates
plan. That's the problem.
conflicting.
That's the problem with the plan.
conflicts that-
the environmental assessment does not address this. It addresses this as a tax and a money grab. It does not address this as an environmental plan, because there are winners and losers. And I, along with the gentleman in the Bronx, are losers.
There's no question that some communities will benefit more than others, and this is an example. Let's move on over here.
Yeah, we spent the whole session here talking about congestion, but I was wondering, what is the baseline from which you measure congestion, especially in the congestion pricing zone? To me, that is an important baseline to know. And where are we going with the congestion reduction?
Right, I'll make a really quick comment and hand it over to maybe Arif wants to chime in on one of these questions. This is one of the flaws in that the congestion pricing law and the congestion pricing environmental documents do not specify a goal. So there's nowhere in the law or the documents does it say, our goal is to tinker with the pricing until we get traffic moving at 10 miles an hour during the 8 to 6 p.m. hours rather than 6 miles an hour, or 7 miles an hour in core Midtown rather than a little bit less than 5 miles an hour. So that is one of the issues, and it goes back to the issue of the first goal here is to raise money. The second goal in a far distance is to reduce congestion. They did not set a traffic flow goal and still have not set one.
Which is amazing, because there are congestion costs indicated there. So how do you measure costs if you don't know where your place is?
And some people say the traffic in Manhattan is always going to just hit its natural level, the point at which people won't get in another car because you just can't fit another car. That is around 5 miles an hour in core Midtown, so there is a risk. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but again, it points to the flexibility that once all the traffic from outside has diminished, people who live in Manhattan, take their kids to school in Manhattan, will say, you know, great, I don't have to I don't have to sit in traffic anymore. I'm going to drive my kid to school today.
So another important metric would be, what is the time saved for the trip that goes into Manhattan?
Yeah, I'll let
Whatever
Charles
distance.
take over. And
What's the
answer.
average of that?
If we could get my computer hooked
Just
up here,
basically, what is
you'd
the
see it.
baseline of speed that you measure congestion from?
Okay, I mean, can I?
Go ahead.
The last city DOT measure of travel speeds within the zone is from 2018. And it said that the average from like 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening was 7.0 miles per hour, okay? Average, you know. I assume a little bit better, 7.5. I'm conservative in my analysis. And you may think 7.5 and 7.0, what's the difference? It's actually like a 6 or 8%, you know, conservative margin. And if we could sort of, I happen to project that my plan, you know, would improve average travel speeds within the zone on weekdays by 11%. The MTA plan a little bit more than that.
But that measure, 11%, is not perceptible by the driver.
Well, actually,
11% of 7 is about 0.7.
okay, that's a fallacy that I walked into this whole thing with as well. If you're only going 7 miles, or say 7.5, and that means it's taking you 8 minutes to go 1 mile, right? And if you can raise that by 10% to 8 and something, instead of taking 10 minutes to go a mile, it's going to take you 8.5 or 9. And if you're going a lot of miles for a lot of days over the course of a year or whatever, that's going to add up. And I think, it's just my projections, what can I tell you, I'm a mathematician, that on an average day, congestion pricing is going to save about 200,000 hours worth of travel every day in the city and the region, a little bit more outside than inside.
The aggregate is there. But for the individual who pays the fine, what is the gain that that individual has from the savings in travel time that it receives from paying the fine?
Okay, as I argued before, I think a plumber is going to make out. It's going to benefit a plumber. For a regular commuter, maybe not. You might have to be really rich and value your time and your ego. You know, I'm a big shot, so minutes really matter for me. So not everybody is going to benefit, obviously, but the overall benefits to society as a whole, and when you count in the subway and the bus, as well as the air, et cetera, are going to more than cover.
To me, an important criterion is the equity of the distribution of the cost on the population that pays the cost. So if there is a value of travel time that matches the cost of the toll, which may be, you know, $200,000 a year, is equivalent to the savings that person.
Well, 200,000 hours. But the thing that I wanted to show, and I can't, is that except in the middle of the night, when traffic flows freely, and even if it didn't, there's so few people on the road that it doesn't matter. Every minute that I'm driving a car within the zone, this is sort of my key point, and I wasn't able to show it, is costing everybody else who's trying to get around 2 minutes worth of lost time, and you can monetize that. It matters.
Okay, let's move on. I do think that there is uncertainty to this, and I think what I think is important to know is that it's okay that there's uncertainty. This is using a market mechanism to give people incentives to behave in certain ways, and as with the capitalist market, we don't know beforehand how it's going to turn out. But it seems to me that in terms of equity, the situation after congestion pricing is better than the situation before, net. And we'll see what happens. We can't possibly know yet. And Charles has equations for it, but we don't know. But I do think net the situation will be better. Let's move over here to maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Some of us have class actually at 2:30, so even I will be taking off pretty soon. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Charlton D'Souza, and I'm the president of Passengers United. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and I actually served on the Environmental Justice Committee for the MTA. And we had about 4 or 5 meetings. It was on Zoom, and we were asking them basic questions. Would New Jersey be getting some of the money? They didn't have an answer for us. We asked them about issues in Nassau County. They didn't answer our questions. So we go to all the MTA board and committee meetings as we have been attending. I can tell you the amount of lobbying that's been spent by Uber, Lyft, all these cab companies. I'm very concerned because New York City actually added hundreds of thousands of for-hire vehicles in the city. That's what's causing the pollution. And then you have these bike lanes. You've narrowed down a street where you used to have 4 lanes or 3 lanes down to 2 lanes or 1 lane, and that's what's causing the traffic. So we need to be mindful of that. And, as far as the MTA, they are the 7th largest debtor in the United States. A lot of people don't know that. These are facts. And so, I just, based on what we saw with that Environmental Justice Committee, the way it was going, and even during the whole process of congestion pricing, our organization could not, in good faith, support congestion pricing. And this goes to Nicole. So with the commuter rails, right? I live in Southeast Queens personally, but some of my members do live in the South Bronx, the North Bronx. And as you guys indicated and alluded to, commutes take longer, especially on the overnights. Like if you have to take a 45-minute bus trip to a subway. And so the railroad pricing is $5. And for many people, for the city ticket, that's not enough money. So we had a program, it was called the Atlantic Ticket. It was a $60 weekly program that the MTA had, which would allow Southeast Queens residents to travel. It was a rail, subway, and bus pass for $60. When the MTA eliminated that program, they eliminated it a year ago, I said, we're done with them. That was it. We lost faith in them to execute this program, and that's the truth.
Well, thank you, Charles. And it's nice to see you in person. I follow you. What did they say why they eliminated?
So basically, they claimed that they were gonna they have the $5 city
right, the city
program.
ticket. Yeah.
But here's the problem with that: if you buy the $5 individual ticket and you want to get on a bus in Queens, you now have to pay an additional $2.90. With that $60 weekly pass, what we were trying to do was get an intercity city ticket for a weekly ticket, which would be closer to $45 or $50 so that people could afford it. But the MTA is not budging on that, and they're not giving it to us. And that concerns me because the for-hire vehicles, every time the subway breaks down, and we go to a lot of the crime scenes in the subway every day. I do the overnights. I can tell you it's bad, and I think the for-hire vehicles, every time there's a signal issue, a malfunction, or a 12-9 where somebody gets hit by a train, the for-hire vehicles are going to love this. They're going to take advantage of it. So I would be very concerned, and I think it's going to destroy New York City. That's the honest truth.
Okay. Arif wanted to make a comment, and we have him back.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I feel like we haven't really given as much time or attention to is just the inefficiency within the MTA. So, we all agree that this program would generate, upwards of $1 billion, possibly more, for the MTA for capital projects.
No, it's $15 billion.
A year?
No, $15 billion of capital total, which will buy a lot of good things.
So setting that aside, Charles, I can just use an example. My parents live near a subway station. The Manhattan direction of that subway station has literally been closed for a year. That's an entire city would have gone up in China by now. There is huge inefficiency that is happening, and why are we not talking about making the MTA more efficient instead of, how many of us are privileged enough to, let's say we misspend our money repairing something in our apartments or in our houses and then expect more money. We're almost rewarding the MTA for its inefficiency rather than really push it to look at where they can become more efficient and make life easier. So my parents are elderly. They need to get on that subway, and there is no plan to even put an elevator in there. So entirely out of ADA compliance. So I feel like that's something that really needs to be lifted up as well, and I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks. Yeah, and I would say we have time for 2 more questions, if they are brief.
Sure. So first, a brief statement. I know about this topic. I'm Alexis Parada. I teach transportation policy at the Mark School here. Hi. And I know that whenever a road has been closed to traffic or whenever pricing has been instituted and traffic decreases in one area, in the peripheral areas and in the region as a whole, there is a decrease in traffic. It really does happen and has happened everywhere that way. We may expect a little bit of an increase in some places or others, and I understand the equity impacts of those are very important. However, net decrease. So with that in mind, given the increase in delivery trucks and the increase in deliveries generally, and the fact that New York City zoning code has no requirement for large residential buildings to have off-street loading, we're going to see more trucks coming into the city. I'd like us to consider a future where that's happening and there's no congestion charging, and then a future where that's happening and there is congestion charging, and how those futures differ from each other.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, just to say that I think we need pricing extended in so many applications. Just the scourge of moped-based or moped using app-based food delivery in the city, which is unpriced in the sense that I can order. I don't, but I could order from the Upper East or Upper West Side and not pay any extra charge for delivery. It's absurd that there's no pricing scheme for that. It's absurd that there's no pricing scheme for e-commerce delivery. It's even absurd that the surcharges for Ubers and Lyfts and yellow taxis, the ones that were instituted 5 years ago and the new ones that are going to be coming in as part of congestion pricing, that they're not distance-based. But we can't run until we can walk. And getting congestion pricing in first and establishing proof of concept is going to be necessary and I hope sufficient to go to these second generation pricing concepts that we're going to need.
Last question.
Charlie, you sort of brought in something for me. First, what would it take you to suggest that congestion pricing is a failure in terms of the objectives that you want? Consider the following. With regard to London, while there was indeed an increase in speeds, that disappeared within 4 years, including bus speeds. I have the TfL report that shows that. So therefore, what you're saying is any reduction in congestion within the CBD, as per the model, will be very transitory. With regard to how the money will be spent, this is one of the places where we disagree. Hold on. With regard to CBTC, the question that you should ask them is what the capacity will be, service level capacity. I have here a report that was written back in 75 years ago when the Fulton Street extension was built. Essentially, it's saying that the signal system is good for having 90-second headways. That's 40 trains per hour, which is what the current situation can be. Theoretically, CBTC does not increase service level capacity. I'm sorry to tell you that. And here's the technical article which shows it. Finally, with regard to quantifying the level of the MTA's inefficiency, there was a recent article. One of the things you can do fairly easily is compare how well the MTA compares to other transit agencies by looking at the National Transportation Database. With regard to that, with regard to bus service and service efficiency, the MTA is the worst by far. Let me continue in terms of what that money translates to. Finally, if the MTA ran its bus service at the service efficiency that says the cost per vehicle mile or vehicle hour as Chicago, Philadelphia, or even Boston, the savings would be $1.2 billion per year and would have been that for the last 20 years if you look at the National Transportation Database. Based upon this, you're saying, hey, you're guaranteeing in terms of something good, your model is a very transitory congestion because it will return. Secondly, you're spending money on something that isn't needed because the existing system is far better. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned 20 and 30 trains per hour on the 14th Street line and Flushing line. I'm old enough, and the MTA, the Transit Authority, reported in their 1954 report what the service levels were. On the Canarsie line, the 14th Street line, it used to be 24 trains per hour. Now it's 20 with CBTC.
We kind of have to wrap it up. And
essentially what you're saying
I just want to say,
no benefits.
I want to interrupt. We're bashing the MTA, but they care a lot more about you and me than every damn driver in the city who's going through the red lights and going 45 miles an hour on a side street, double parking everywhere. I have to say, in terms of who are the good guys and the bad guys here, it is not the people who are unnecessarily driving their cars, going too fast, double parking, honking their horns constantly. It seems to me that the solution lies with the people who are trying to create a good transit system. They are flawed, and they do an imperfect job, and they use our taxes imperfectly. But I don't think they're the bad guys here.
They're just incompetent.
And why don't we...
David, just
Yeah.
in terms of London, now as compared to before congestion pricing went in 21 years ago, there are half as many cars being driven into the zone, and 22% more human beings, people, are coming into the zone in all ways combined now as compared to before. And if the speeds aren't higher, I still call that success.
Sure, I agree with you that the numbers that are going into the zone have remained low. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. The point is they're not accomplishing the goals that they were set out to do.
Well, they're making a better city.
All right, let's end there. Thank you so much, Arif, especially for being a good sport and doing this remotely. and Nicole and Charles as well. And as always, a good program is characterized by raising more questions than answering, and we can continue the conversation.